But who else are the real Shemites? There are other anti-Zionist, non-Ashkenazi, Torah-keeping Jews worldwide that are the true Shemites, just like the Yemenite Jews and the black African Shemites. And I most probably shouldn't go here, but I will anyway. You see, after the destruction of the temple, yes, many of the Jews, the poor Jews, remained in the land, but there was a migration as well of the more affluent Jews to Yemen and to other parts of Africa. You see, the black African Shemites were actually then taken away in slave ships. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century.
And why are you venturing into those forsaken regions? What do you know about a man named Shaka? Does that answer your question, Lieutenant? The Masani tribe, Humulos, Lubis, Unos, Yunguanis, countless others, the banished of Southeast Africa, fleeing Shaka's spears, going straight into the arms of the white slave traders and the British troops on the borders of the Cape Colony. In a way, Lieutenant, they are the ultimate victims of recent history. If you'll favor my comparison, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka, they are the wandering Jews of Africa. Fleeing the Pharaoh Shaka into the Babylonian captivity of slavery.
How do I say this? The entire Bible is about black people. Not only was Jesus black, but every character in the Bible seems to be black too. Yeah, Zephaniah and Jeremiah and Jebediah, those all aren't white people names, okay? And Jesus wasn't some tan, partially melanated Middle Eastern person either. I'm talking straight up black dude, okay? Even in the book of Revelation, when you get the vision of Daniel, he's describing someone with feet like burnt brass and white woolly hair, and we've got the deep running water voice with the red eyes, and you guys, he's black. The Jewish people are black people, like Kanye was right. And those people yelling at the park dressed in purple about black people being the real Hebrew Israelites, they're right, okay? Like, anytime you see the word Hebrew or Israelite or Jew in the Bible, in your mind you got to replace that with black person. So the whole Bible is going to make a lot more sense to you once you start reading it like that. But you need to let this get settled in your heart now before you get up there. So, I mean, they were literally whipping him on his way to get crucified, you guys. Crucifixion was a punishment, like, for slaves back then. And gladiators. And all the gladiators were black too. Did you know that? Like, you guys, he was sold for 30 pieces of silver. That was the maximum amount of money that a slave could be sold for. Oh, just coincidence? Above his cross, it says INRI. They were like mocking him. They were saying it says this is the king of the Jews. They're saying, like, here's the king of the black people. Look what we did to him. Why does the KKK burn crosses, you guys? The racist KKK. It's just, black people rejoice. You are God's chosen people. Like, I mean, those are some big shoes to fill, but be honored. Like, feel good about that. Like, how cool. Anyway, see you later. Jesus was black.
This is Luke 12:2. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Kahala Yahweh Bashem Yashayah Bashem Kodash, which are the true Hebrew names of the Most High Father, Yahweh, which is Hebrew for He is, and His only begotten Son, Yahweh, which is Hebrew for He is salvation, He delivers. Double honors to my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. peace and mercy to the elect, with the house of David reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yashayah, who today were known as the Negros, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to go into the tribe of Judah, or who the world refers to as the Jews, who are known today as the so-called Negros. Now, in the videos that we just watched, you've seen multiple people who we would refer to as Caucasian, whose lineage will go back to the Edomites, letting us know that the so-called Negroes are in fact the true biblical Jews. Now, the reason why I read that scripture right now in Luke is because this is a very deep, hidden secret that the world has tried to bury for a long time, which is now coming out. In fact, it has caused so much controversy here in America and really around the world that not only is it causing people to lose fortunes, but it's getting people to be fired from their positions. And it's also just causing a lot of cognitive dissonance amongst people when they have to consider that the so-called Negroes are in fact the chosen people of the Bible. Now, that being said, the so-called Negroes, the Jews, are not the only chosen people of the Bible. Okay, the chosen people of the Bible would be who we refer to as the Negros, Latinos, and Native Americans. I'm making an entire series covering all the 12 tribes and who they are, what their biblical blessing and their prophecies say that they would be in the end times. And the reason I'm covering this is because the tribe of Judah is the head tribe of the Israelites, and because of that, they have suffered the most. This is why our enemies, these Edomites, the people who right now say that they are the Jews, but they're not. Revelations 2:9 and 3:9, explains that there's going to be imposters posing as the chosen people. Now those scriptures there are also talking about wicked Israelites, but it's twofold, right? It also spoke about a future prophecy about how there was going to be these imposters claiming to be the Israelites. And we know that those are the Khazars that are dwelling in the land of Israel today. Now, that being said, the prophecy in the Bible explains that the true Israelites, including the true biblical Jews, would be in captivity outside of the land of Israel until the Lord himself comes back and returns us back into the land. Now, getting into details, the Israelites all come from a man known as Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Israel in Hebrew is Yashayah, right? And the name Yashayah in Hebrew literally means he prince power, right? Basically, we are the princes of God, right? The children of God. Now, that being said, Judah, who the Jews come from, and hence the Negroes come from, he comes from the mother Leah, who was Jacob's first wife. Okay? And when you get into Judah, when he was born, our foremother Leah gave him this specific name, which means to praise God, right? Let's read it real quick. This is Genesis 29 and 35. And she conceived again and bare a son. And she said, now will I praise Yahweh. Therefore she called his name Yahwadah, and left bearing. So again, Yahwadah basically means God praise, right? Yahweh praise, right? So this is why we try to explain to people that that's a cut for people who call God's name Yahuwah or Ahaya, right? Because it's easy to find out God's name if you understand for example, Judah's name and what it means. So again, you say Judah with God's name in it. So Yahweh Da. Okay? Because again, what you're saying is God praise. Right? So that's a cut to a lot of our people who are calling upon Yashayah or Yahuwah. Right? Because Judah's name isn't Yahuwah, it's Yahweh. Okay? So that's, just a little side note there. Well, back to Judah. Along with Judah and all his brethren, he was given a future prophecy and a blessing. Now, the future prophecy came from his father, Jacob, Israel. Before he passed on, he had given all his 12 sons a prophecy of what would befall them and basically their descendants in the end days. And this is what the prophecy for Judah said, right? It was one of the larger prophecies that Jacob gave out. This is Genesis 49:8. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down to thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his fowl onto the vine, and his ass's colt onto the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his cloths in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Now, to break this down, this basically explains that Judah is going to be the head tribe, right? Remember, at this point, there was only a couple hundred of people that were considered Israelites, right? It told you when the Israelites went down into Egypt, when Joseph had invited us into that land, there was about like 70 of us, right? 70, 75, something like that. I forget the number off the top of my head. But by the time that Israel was passing on, we had grown in size. Now, at this point, Judah was simply just one of the 12 tribes, so it wasn't yet known that he was going to be the head tribe. Okay? And that when it tells you here that thy hand shall be on the neck of thine enemies, when you look at the so-called Negros, in any of their captivities, and even in their rulership, they have always been the tribe that has basically been closest to our enemies, right? Even right now in the land of Babylon the Great, here where the Edomites, headquarters are at, you have Judah in high places of office, okay? Basically their hands on their enemies' necks. And also, when you look back in the time when they took over Rome, during the 200 or 400 AD period, they had, gained and rose to power, right? Fulfilling that prophecy. Now it tells you here where it says, thy father's children shall bow down to thee. Again, when you look at the other tribes, compared to the tribe of Judah, Judah obviously is the head tribe. That all the other tribes that we look up to, right? Through the leaders of that tribe and just in general in the spiritual movement of ours, which we'll get into in just a bit. The next line, it says, Judah is a lion's whelp. From a prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down and crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Meaning that throughout Judah's existence, right, he's always been a leader, hence a young lion, right? And what's going to happen is when it says he stooped down, he's ultimately means when Judah has gone into slavery, right, during the North Atlantic slave trade, and also the sub-Saharan slave trade, right? The southern kingdom of Israel, right? The so-called Negros, they have, for the most part, become humbled, okay? And they haven't really roused up. If you look at current examples, right now, the so-called Negroes are in a very docile state, and they haven't roused up or revolted against Babylon the Great and these Edomites who reign over them. And why is that? Well, right now they're being satiated, and they're also just being oppressed extremely hard by these Edomites. They're getting over-policed and over-regulated, right? They've been psychologically destroyed, right? They've been targeted by having their family structure destroyed, right? Back in I think it was like the 70s, they initiated the breaking up of the family by bringing social services in, offering the woman money as long as there was no man in the house, basically, pushing feminism, which Eve of the Judah tribes basically just, latched onto, right? They have systematically destroyed the tribe of Judah. And Judah right now is in a crouched down state spiritually. But like it tells you here, who shall rouse them up? Well, that's ultimately going to be the Lord, right? This truth of ours that's coming up right now, this is rousing up Judah across the entire world, right? They're starting to stand upon their feet along with the other tribes that are hearing this message. And there's going to come a time when the Lord, when He's going to show up, that we're then going to rouse up and take action, like the scriptures say. When it says here, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, meaning that Judah, once the king was established by the Lord, that ultimately it would come, or it would be established in Judah. Okay, remember the first king was from Benjamin, right? That being King Saul. Now Saul ultimately he was what the people desired, and he ultimately didn't meet the requirements of the Lord. And then when the Lord chose the king, that being King David, out of the house of Jesse, which again was from the tribe of Judah, since then there has not been a king that the Lord appointed that came out of any other tribe, right? Even though the northern kingdom, let's go ahead and bring out the Bible timeline. So the people selected King Saul, but ultimately the Lord chose King David. And King David was set up, and then after King David came his son, King Solomon, who we understand through the Spirit was Yashayah, the Messiah, before in the reincarnation. Now, ultimately, after King Solomon had passed on and he had built a temple, the kingdom of Israel was divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay? And the southern kingdom of Judah was where Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned. And then all the kings of the northern tribe, the kingdom of Israel, they were all, for the most part, self-appointed, not appointed by God. Now, that being said, when you get into the lineages of the kings, right? Here's the, let me zoom in here. So like I said, King Saul, David, Solomon, right? Blue denotes they were considered a good king in the eyes of the Lord, right? The right side here is Israel, the northern kingdom. Left side is Judah. So notice Judah has always had a king, okay? And it went all the way down until it came to Zedekiah. And then when the Messiah came during the time of the New Testament, or should I say the Roman captivity, that was the last king to rule, or basically should I say the last king or considered king of the Israelites, okay? And it was done in a mocking fashion by the Romans when they actually put the title above the cross when he was crucified, calling it, Yahweh Shai, the king of the Jews. Okay? Now, that being said, that's what's meant here. It says, until Shiloh come. Okay? So, next, and where it says, binding his, and then this right here all talks about the future prophecy of the Messiah coming. Okay? And how ultimately, this is where we get that the eyes of the Messiah when he comes back are going to be red with wine, right? And then also that his teeth are going to be white with milk. White with milk tends to mean that he's going to be rich enough so that he'll drink enough milk to where his teeth will be white, right? And this is kind of like explained as a way, because back in these times, to have a lot of cattle, a lot of goats and whatnot, to be able to have enough milk like that, that was shown as a sign of wealth. Now, onto Judah's blessing, right? When Moses was about to pass away, he then also gave the tribes their own blessings, right? This is Deuteronomy 33:7. And this is the blessing of Judah. And he said, hear Yahweh, the voice of Judah, and bring him unto his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and be thou an help to him from his enemies. And again, this is just a spiritual sign of why the so-called Negroes are so mighty. Okay, why they're able to stand up against their enemies. Now, in this current time, they're going up against the Edomites, who have been given spiritual power to dominate over them. Okay, that's the only reason why these Edomites are able to dominate over the so-called Negroes, is because right now God is with them. But that being said, once Judah is back in his spiritual, rightness, he's gonna basically crush our enemies, and this is ultimately why the Lord, set him up the way he's been set up. Okay, a good example of this is when you look at the book of the Maccabees during the Greek captivity, and you could see what the southern kingdom was able to do when they came up against their enemies and they had the Lord on their side, right? They were unstoppable. That being said, once the Israelites, let me actually bring back the Bible timeline. So we were here, right? So once the Israelites had separated themselves into two, the kingdom, for the most part, went on to a crazy bunch of events. You have obviously know about all the stories about the wars that broke out, the drama that played out between the tribes, between each other, and even within themselves. And eventually what ended up happening is that the northern kingdom, the Latinos and Native Americans, they got kicked out of the land in 722 BC. Now, eventually, the southern kingdom, right, they tried to right the wrongs that they had committed, but by destroying idols and whatnot, but eventually that only lasted for so long, to where unfortunately it came the time when the last king of the southern kingdom, from the king's lineages that had preceded King Solomon, had come to pass, right? King Zedekiah, where last thing he saw was his sons being put to death, and then they ultimately put out his eyes until taking him to Babylon, along with the southern kingdom. Now the southern kingdom stayed in Babylon for a while, and this is where you hear about the story of Susanna, Daniel giving the interpreting the dreams of the king of Babylon, the three children that, basically the three southern kingdom Israelites that were put into the ovens, but the Lord saved them, right? That would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? And then ultimately they were freed by the Persians. Now, later on, also the other stories that happened during that time were Bel and Dragon, Daniel's in the lion's den. Ezra then leads the Israelites back to Jerusalem, and this is where you get the book of Ezra, or second Ezra's and stuff. And then eventually, what ended up happening is, let me just skip down here. The Greeks come into Jerusalem, and ultimately meet with the priest tell Alexander the Macedonian that he was going to conquer the known world, and Alexander was cool with us. And eventually what ended up happening is he passed on, and then Alexander's 4 generals came in like tyrants, and ultimately basically, like it tells us in the Bible, evils were multiplied in the world. Now eventually what ended up happening was, let's skip through, like I said, the Maccabees came in, basically pushed back the Greeks, retook the temple, and established a quasi rule there in Jerusalem, where the temple was rededicated, and they basically established Jerusalem to the point where when the Messiah showed up on the scene after the Romans came, took over, right? Eventually Herod marries into the Maccabean family by marrying the women. The Maccabees unfortunately had passed on, right? They were taken out through horrible deaths, but eventually Jerusalem fell into the hands of the Edomites, and then John the Baptist was born and Yashayah was born. And this is the time when Jerusalem was basically visited by the Messiah, okay? And this is when the end started, okay? And the Vatican had gone back and redid the time and called this 0 AD, which is what we understand today between the BC and the AD eras. And then all the events that took place from Yahweh preaching to John the Baptist being put to death, to the Last Supper, the crucifixion, and the resurrection of the Messiah, and the time when he taught the apostles and the disciples, and then also from the apostles, performing their acts, ultimately came to a point where prophecy ultimately was going to play out, and that was that Jerusalem was going to be desolate, and that the Israelites were going to be scattered throughout the entire world, and that they were going to ultimately forget who they were. We were going to lose our heritage, as the Bible tells us. And this took place in 70 AD, when they brought the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, let's go and read this. This is the prophecy that would fall upon us, and this was given to us by Moses. This is Deuteronomy 28:15. It says, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of Yahweh, Bashem Yashayah, thy power, to observe, to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." Now, in this scripture here, in this chapter, I should say, the very beginning is telling us about the blessings that would come upon us if we kept the laws of the Lord. And then chapter 15, all the way down, tells us, like I just read, what would happen to us, all the curses and the bad things that would happen to us if we would fail to keep the laws of the Lord. Now, at this point, the northern kingdom had already been casted out. Like I said, in 722 BC, they got taken away by the Assyrians, and then ultimately came here to the Americas. And now, in 70 AD, the Romans decided to put an end to the Israelite nation that had still existed there in Jerusalem. And they ultimately took many of them into the slave markets in Rome, and a lot of others fled into Africa. And this is the prophecy part that was starting to come to pass. This is jumping down to verse 68. "And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." Buy ultimately here means redeemed. Okay? And that's what happened to the Israelites. Okay? When the time came to 70 AD, the southern kingdom had basically, the Lord basically said, "That's enough of you," and put them into flight, and started the road for them to go into captivity. Now, like I said, many of them were taken into the Roman slave markets right? The Israelites that weren't killed off during this siege, and the ones that did manage to escape, like we've seen in the video, in the first video here, fled into Africa, into Yemen and whatnot. Now, this destruction of Jerusalem was a very big monumental, event that took place. Okay, and when that happened, many nations thought that they had destroyed the Israelites. Okay, now let's go and read what ultimately ended up happening. Right, this can be found in the book called Babylon, from Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. He writes on page 84, it says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. You see that? So, like it just said, man, after the destruction of Israel, a lot of the affluent Judites fled into Yemen in the southern coast of the Arabian Peninsula and down into Ethiopia and the east coast of Africa, but the majority went to the west coast of Africa, right? And even up here to North Africa, where Libya is today, or where Carthage was at. And why is that? Well, Carthage was founded by the descendants of the king of Tyre. Okay, and remember, the king of Tyre, the Hamites, were very friendly to the Israelites. Okay, and so they found a lot of refuge there. The Israelites that fled into Carthage would later on become known as the Moors. Okay, or the Moorish Empire would be from the Israelites that were in Carthage, and also the Israelites that were taken into slavery from the sub-Saharan slave trade that eventually took on the religion of their captors, the Arabs, and also the Hamites, who were Islamists. Okay, and then ultimately their stronghold was in northern Africa, where the Silk Road traffic came through, and hence the sub-Saharan slave trade had a market. Now, fast forward throughout the 1500 years that the southern kingdom of Israel were basically refugees here in the land of Africa, they eventually started to establish lands, right? Little kingdoms here on the west coast of Africa. And this is the reason why a lot of the Hamites, the native people of Africa, didn't like them there, and ultimately would capture and basically oppress them, and would eventually sell them not only to the Arabs in the sub-Saharan slave trade, but later on to the Edomites during the North Atlantic slave trade. But if we zoom in, for example, on this map, we could actually see the settlements. Let me just zoom in here. So right here you can see Negro land. Right here is upper proper Guyana. But if you zoom in right here, you can see Kingdom of Judah, or Waida, on the slave coast, right? Judah, Waida, right? So this is also where like the Ashanti people would be at. Also Kingdom of Benin, right? Could easily be for Benjamin. But you had a lot of the Israelites, had established lands or little fiefdoms here in this land where they were refugees at. Because remember, the southern kingdoms were refugees in Africa for 1,500 years before they were found. Now that being said, there's many documented images like this one here showing, what does it say? It says, the Ashanti War. Ashanti ambassadors crossing the Pra River in 1874. Now, when you look at this image here, this man here sitting down, he's straight up wearing an ephod, which is the same breastplate that the Levite priest would wear. Okay, so not only do you see evidence of things like this, right? Because again, this guy here would have been a descendant of one of the Levites, okay, which is why he had this ephod. There's also testimonies of the Uman or the Thuman rocks being given to one of these explorers by a Knights Templar who said he got it down there in Africa, okay, and that it had a Hebrew character on the inside. Now, a lot of people, they make the mistake when referring to the African slave trade that blacks sold blacks into slavery, but they weren't, because you see, again, like the point I'm trying to make is that the Israelites who fled into Africa, though they may have looked a bit similar, right, had the same color, they were different people, okay? They came from different stocks. Let's go and watch this.
The average African American genome is very distinct from the African genomes from which they were taken. Now, you couple that with the fact that there is more genetic diversity within the African continent than in the rest of the world put together, which means that, on average, someone from Senegal is more different genetically to someone from Angola than either of those people are to anyone else on the rest of the planet. And that's just what the genetics says. So, I know this is quite a brain-scrambling concept.
No, I'm with you.
But this is one of the problems with the earlier conversation about how we categorize people. We say black people, right? Because Linnaeus said black people, Homo sapiens Afa, or Africanus. But actually, it's a completely incoherent biological category because of the amount of genetic diversity that exists in people who are in Africa or from the African diasporas. So how this relates to the transatlantic slave trade means that you've got two people taken from maybe neighboring tribes or counties or whatever the equivalent is, or countries, who are taken from their birthplace, put onto ships, mixed around, they live or die, they then traded around, forcibly mated potentially. We know from the genetics now that there is a lot of European DNA in the African American genome, and mostly it is from male Europeans into female African Americans. So, figure that out. Interestingly, the converse is also true. Many white Americans have up to 20% of African ancestry that we can measure in their DNA.
So right here, let's also read this. This is from the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary on Ham, right, who are the native Africans. It says, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negros, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and Canaanites. So you see that? So that right there should explain to you why it wasn't blacks selling blacks during the North Atlantic slave trade. It was Hamites selling Israelites, okay? That's why you have images like this showing these Hamites, putting these Israelites into slavery, right? There's also many other, features. For example, Hamites, they don't grow beards, right? They have different bone structures. Like the man just said in the video, the genetics are totally off, right? This is also another reason why true Africans can come to America and they have a totally different experience than your average American Negro, because they are different people, and spiritually the curses don't fall upon them like they do our people. This is also why they're not as lively as the Judites, okay? This is why there's a big difference between Montalvo and Michael Jordan, okay? Now, that being said, the North Atlantic slave trade was all part of the Lord's prophecy, like I had read, right? It was a curse that the Lord would bring the Israelites over to a new land, to their enemy's land, on ships. Now, he did that first with the northern kingdom when he brought them over here to the Americas on ships, and they stayed here in the Americas for about 2,500 years before they were captive. They were captured and then, made to serve our enemies. And then later he did it to the southern kingdom when he brought them over here in 1618 in starting that North Atlantic slave trade. Okay, and that lasted until about the mid 1800s. And right here, you could see all the routes, the large routes that took place. Okay, and it said there's approximately 10 to 15 million enslaved people were transported from Western Africa to the Americas. Most were shipped to the West Indies, Central America, and South America. So you see, this here is how the Lord ultimately got both the southern kingdom and northern kingdom in the same areas, on the same side of the earth, which was the opposite side of the land of Israel. And that's what caused this prophecy to be fulfilled. This is Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled the fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. And you see, so that right there meant that the Lord was going to cause us Israelites to forget who we were. He was going to take our heritage away from us, right? And how did he do that? Well, like I just said, through captivity. When we went into captivity at our different times, we ultimately got our heritage beaten out of us, right? This is why the Negro, Latinos, and Native Americans, we've had our last names taken away, right? Or should I just say our names taken away from us, right? It's been proven that the Israelites that came over here on the North Atlantic slave ships, they had Hebrew names, right? But what happened, right? There's even a famous scene, for God's sake, right? Showing a slave, a Judite, being beaten, right? That famous scene in Roots where they ask him, oh, what's your name? And he's all, Kunta Kinte. And they whip him and they say, no, your name's Toby, right? See, that right there is how our heritage got beaten out of us. The southern and northern kingdom, we both inherited the last names of our captors, right? Me being a Latino, I have the name that was given to my descendants from our captors. And that's the same way that it happened to the southern kingdom. This is Baruch 2:30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. And that is ultimately what's going on right now, right? The Negro, Latino, Native Americans, we are remembering who we are. And how is that happening? Well, you see, the Lord, he put it on the spirit of our southern kingdom brothers, that being the tribe of Judah, to wake up first. And how did he do that? Well, the Lord brought John the Baptist, the prophet Elijah, back in the reincarnation in the 50s. Okay, we know that man today as Abba Bivens. Okay, and when Abba Bivens came back on the scene, he ultimately, through his studying and his teaching, he started a movement. The movement that we recognize today as the Hebrew Israelite movement, which is a movement that's been going on since the beginning of our time, since Adam and Eve, right? But back then it wasn't called Hebrew Israelite movement. It was basically just, it was known as the Children of God movement, okay? And the thing is that the Lord fulfilled this prophecy here regarding the Judah. This is Zechariah 12:7. Yahweh Bashem Yashayah also shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. And this is why you see the tribe of Judah being the first to have woken to this truth. This is why when you get into the Hebrew Israelite movement, it's always so-called Negroes that were, on the streets, teaching this message, going out there and, and telling people that, they were the Israelites, right? And then eventually, little by little, they started bringing in the other tribes. And this is why now you see Latinos and Native Americans also coming into this truth, right? That's how it all worked. That's how prophecy has played out. So hopefully I was able to break down the tribe of Judah and explain how they are today's so-called Negroes, and they in fact are the true biblical Jews of the Holy Bible. So let's go and give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yashayah, Ba'Shem, Shalom.